I'm a NASA geologist. I wish I was never born. Introduction. A price for discovery. I want to start by saying this. If you truly value your peace of mind, if you wish to live the rest of your days without the weight of unbearable knowledge, stop reading. I wish more than anything that I could go back to ignorance. But if you're insistent on continuing this read, if my warning cannot deter you, then by all means, heed this one piece of advice above all else. Do not bring children into this world. From Earth, Mars is just a dusty red orb, a lifeless neighbor. For those of us in NASA's geology division, though, it was the Lady, an affectionate nickname for a planet that's captivated us. It was a dream to study her, and for years we labored over samples and data sent back from the Indomitable, a top-secret rover. The breakthrough came with a single image, sample B92, a geological wonder trapped beneath the surface for billions of years. Adam, our lead geologist, had shouted with unrestrained joy.
We got motherfucking alien ruins!
Except they weren't ruins. Not exactly. What we'd discovered was an ancient geological pocket, a preserved fragment of Mars as it once was, when it still held water. It was a time capsule, an untouched oasis of potential life signs. Adam's excitement had been premature, but the discovery was monumental nonetheless. Years of work culminated in the launch of a new rover, the Promise, armed with a custom-built probe to explore the pocket in detail. We weren't expecting cities or civilizations, but fossilized life, chemical traces, something to confirm the Lady's once vibrant past. When the probe's camera feed started streaming back to us, we were all entirely glued to the screen. The descent into the pocket brought nothing but darkness at first. Then, slowly, the images came into focus. We saw impossible structures, geometries that defied understanding, walls and spires made of materials that hurt to look at, as if they shouldn't even exist at all. It's nothing of the norm. And there were silhouettes, hundreds of them, scattered throughout the alien architecture. But the centerpiece of the images was a massive monolith, its surface etched with repeating symbols. Adam paused the feed. His voice cracked as he read the translation aloud. Life was a mistake. The room was silent. No one argued with Adam's interpretation. The meaning was clear, horrifyingly so. The images told a story, not of war, as some had theorized, but of deliberate extinction. The Martians hadn't been destroyed by an enemy. They had chosen to end themselves, every last one. Their final act was to leave behind this warning, a cryptic message of despair carved into an indestructible slab. Here's what the monolith conveyed. Someone alive, someone dead, a deity pushing someone away, someone's body decomposing. The mind is all that is left, the mind surrounded by darkness, the mind alone forever. They didn't die out because of war or resource scarcity. They had seen something, understood something so unbearable that extinction seemed like mercy. And now, I can't unsee it. I can't even begin to unknow it. I drink myself into oblivion every night, trying to erase the images and the implications from my mind. But it doesn't work. The lady's warning is burned into my soul, and I'm terrified for us all. If the Martians were right, if their understanding was correct, then existence itself is the tragedy. Life was a mistake. Chapter 1. The protagonist's unraveling. I wish I could say that I didn't see it coming, that those warning signs weren't there. But looking back, every moment, every breakthrough, every decision feels like stepping onto a train destined for catastrophe. It started like most monumental things do, not with a bang, but a whisper. A late night in the lab, coffee gone cold on my desk, and Adam yelling from across the room.
We've got something. B92, You're going to want to see this.
Adam, our lead geologist, was the kind of man whose enthusiasm could light up a funeral. He'd spent decades chasing the dream of finding life, any life, beyond Earth. It wasn't just a job for him. It was a religion. I remember the way his voice cracked, the unfiltered joy in his eyes as he gestured for me to join him. The whole team crowded around his monitor, a patchwork of weary faces lit by the blue glow of the screen. At first, the image didn't make much sense. It was grainy, distorted, just shadows and smudges. Then Adam adjusted the contrast, and everything became clear.
Are those?
Someone whispered.
Structures.
Adam said.
Geometries. Manufactured. This isn't natural.
The room erupted into chaos, questions, theories, gasps of disbelief. I just stood there, staring. Something about the image unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. The structures didn't just look alien, they looked wrong, as if they weren't meant to exist at all. But Adam was already moving to the next slide, his excitement contagious.
This changes everything,
he said, his voice trembling.
We've been waiting for this for years. Proof of advanced life.
It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to set things in motion. Within weeks, NASA had greenlit the launch of the Promise, a new rover designed to probe the site in unprecedented detail. Adam called it the Lady's Gift, as if Mars herself had chosen to reveal her secrets to us. But secrets, I've learned, are rarely given. They're stolen, and the price is always higher than you expect. The months that followed were a blur of preparation and anticipation. When the Promise finally touched down on Mars, the mood in the lab was electrified. We gathered in the observation room, the air thick with unspoken hope. The first images were breathtaking, wide shots of the Martian landscape, red dunes stretching endlessly under a pale pink sky. Then the rover descended into the pocket. That's when the unease began. At first, it was subtle. The shadows didn't look quite right. Angles that should have been sharp were blurred, and curves seemed to twist in ways that made my eyes water. Adam dismissed it as a calibration issue, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. When the rover reached the structures, the tension in the room was palpable. The geometries were unlike anything we'd ever seen, sharp, angular, and impossibly intricate. walls and spires was jutted out at impossible angles, their surfaces shimmering as if alive. And then there were the silhouettes, hundreds of them scattered throughout the architecture. They weren't human, but their shapes were eerily familiar. Elongated limbs, bulbous heads, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. They stood frozen like statues, yet there was something unnervingly lifelike about them. The room fell silent as the rover's camera focused on the monolith. It was massive, towering over the surrounding structures. Its surface was smooth, black as obsidian, and etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift when you looked at them. Adam froze. His hand hovered over the controls as the translation software began its work. The symbols resolved into words, clear and simple. Life was a mistake. No one spoke. No one moved. The words hung in the air like a curse. Adam broke the silence, his voice trembling.
What does that mean? Is it a warning? A message?
I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words felt like they were carved into my brain, their weight pressing down on my chest. The days that had followed were a haze of meetings, debates, and many sleepless nights. Some of my colleagues were convinced it was a misinterpretation, a glitch in the software. But deep down, we all knew the truth. The message was clear, and it wasn't just meant for us. I started having nightmares. In them, I was standing in the pocket, surrounded by the alien structures. The silhouettes watched me, their hollow eyes filled with a silent judgment. The monolith loomed above me, its surface alive with shifting symbols. Life was a mistake, it whispered, over and over. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, the words echoing in my mind. The lab became unbearable. Every image from the promise felt like a personal attack, a reminder of the truth I was desperately trying to ignore. Adam threw himself into the work, obsessing over every detail, but I could see the cracks forming. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. His once boundless enthusiasm was replaced by a quiet desperation.
We have to know,
he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper.
We have to understand why they believe that.
I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I was starting to believe it too. The final straw came when the rover uncovered a new inscription buried beneath the monolith. It was a series of pictograms, a story told in symbols, a figure alive and vibrant. The same figure, decaying, a shadowy presence pushing it away. A mind floating in darkness, alone forever. Adam stared at the screen, his face pale.
It's us,
he said.
It's our future.
I quit the next day. The truth is, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a confession. Maybe it's a warning. Or maybe I just need someone else to bear the weight of this knowledge. I can't unsee it. I can't unknow it. And every night, when I close my eyes, I hear the same words over and over. Life was a mistake. Chapter 2: The Martians' Backstory. I wasn't ready to let go, no matter how much I tried. Even after leaving the lab, after walking away from the promise and the people I once called my colleagues, Mars had its grasp clung to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the monolith, its symbols shifting like restless shadows. I dreamed of the figures, those silhouettes frozen in their eternal stillness. But more than anything, I dreamed of the story, the pictograms, the meaning behind them, the message they carried. In my sleepless nights, I pored over the images and data I had quietly saved before my departure, a violation of every ethical code. But what did ethics matter when the universe itself was unraveling? At first, the pictograms were fragments, disjointed, incomplete. But the deeper I delved in, the more they began to connect. It wasn't a language in the traditional sense. It was something more primal, something that bypassed logic and burrowed straight into the soul. It started with their world. Mars as it once was, blue skies, sprawling oceans, lush greenery. The lady, alive and thriving. The pictogram showed a civilization, vast and interconnected, their cities glittering like constellations. The Martians had been dreamers, creators, explorers. They reached for the stars much as we do. But then the images darkened. A discovery, something buried deep within their planet, a secret that had been hidden for eons. The pictogram struggled to convey what it was. A presence? A force? A truth? It was impossible to decipher. All I knew was that it had shattered them. One of the panels showed a group of figures gathered around the monolith, their heads bowed in reverence, or perhaps despair. Another showed the same figures crumbling to dust, their forms dissolving into the ether. The story wasn't just about their extinction. It was about their choice. Weeks turned into months, and my obsession only grew. I barely ate. I barely slept. I avoided friends, family, anyone who might notice the dark circles under my eyes or the tremor in my hands. I told myself I was searching for answers, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was searching for an escape, a way to make sense of the senseless. And then I found it. Buried within the monolith's inscriptions was something we had missed, an encoded signal. It wasn't just a message, it was a map. The coordinates pointed to a second site, deeper within the pocket, untouched by the promise. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it wasn't my problem anymore. But the dreams wouldn't stop. The monolith wouldn't let me go. So I made the call. Adam answered on the second ring. His voice was hoarse, his words slurred. I could hear the clink of a bottle against a glass in the background.
Why are you calling me?
He said.
I found something.
I replied.
Something big.
He didn't believe me at first, but when I sent him the coordinates, his tone changed.
You realize what you're asking me to do, right?
He said.
If this gets out,
It won't.
I assured him.
No one has to know any of this. Just one last probe. One last look.
He hesitated, then sighed.
you're going to have to owe me for this.
The images came back a week later. I stared at my screen, my heart pounding as the camera feeds streamed in. The second site was smaller than the first, more contained. The structures were less elaborate, their surfaces smoother, almost organic. And at the center was another monolith. This one was different. Its surface was translucent, faintly glowing, as if it held something within. The probe moved closer, its camera zooming in on the monolith's core. And then I saw it. A figure suspended in the translucent material. Not one of the silhouettes, but something else entirely. It was humanoid, but its proportions were wrong. Elongated limbs, too many joints, a head that seemed to shift in shape as I looked at it. Its eyes were open, its gaze fixed on something beyond the camera. The inscriptions on this monolith were more intricate, more chaotic. But one phrase repeated itself over and over, etched into every surface. The mind is the prison. The data from the second sight was overwhelming, and Adam struggled to make sense of it.
There's something alive in there.
He said during one of our late-night calls.
Not physically, but mentally, psychically. And I don't really know how to explain it.
I didn't respond. I was too busy staring at the images, trying to piece together what it all meant. The Martians had discovered something that transcended the physical, a layer of reality beyond our comprehension. And it had driven them to annihilation. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a recording. The probe had picked up a faint signal, buried beneath layers of static. When we cleaned it up, the sound that emerged was not a voice, but a hum, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. And within that hum was a single, repeating phrase: "We are still here." The Martians hadn't just left us a warning, they had left us a choice. Would we follow in their footsteps, or would we turn away from the truth they had uncovered? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the hum was growing louder, and it wasn't coming from the recording anymore. It was coming from inside my head. Chapter 3: The Ambiguous Ending. The hum never stopped. At first, I could drown it out. Blaring music, white noise, anything to keep my mind from fixating on the low, resonant drone that had wormed its entirety into my thoughts. But it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a weight pressing down against the walls of my mind, growing heavier by the day. I started seeing things, flashes of light in the corners of my vision, shapes moving in the shadows. Dreams turned to nightmares, vivid and suffocating. I was back on Mars, standing in the pocket, surrounded by those impossible geometries. The figures loomed around me, their hollow eyes watching, judging, and the monolith spoke, not in words, but in images, sensations, a flood of alien memories, incomprehensible yet undeniably real. I saw the Martians in their final days, sitting in silent rows before the monolith, their faces blank with resignation. I felt their despair, their certainty that they had uncovered a truth so devastating that existence itself had become a burden. The mind is the prison. I woke up gasping for air, the hum louder than ever. Adam called me 2 days later. I hadn't heard from him since the second sight. His voice was trembling, barely recognizable.
It's happening to me too,
he said. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I could hear it in the silence between his words, the faint hum echoing through the phone line.
They didn't leave the warning for us.
He continued.
Not specifically. They didn't know we'd find it. The warning was for them.
I frowned.
What are you talking about?
He hesitated, then whispered.
The hum? It's not just a sound. It's alive. A piece of them, of their consciousness. They tried to contain it, to seal it away in the monoliths. But we woke it up.
The line went dead before I could respond. I tried calling him back, but he never answered. 2 days later, I got the news. Adam was dead. They said it was suicide, but I knew better. The hum grew louder. I stopped leaving my apartment, stopped answering calls. The world outside felt distant, unreal. My life had become a waking dream, the boundaries between reality and memory dissolving. The images came in flashes, the figures on Mars, the monoliths, the inscriptions, and always, always, the phrase that haunted my every waking moment. Life was a mistake. I don't know when it happened, but one night, I realized I wasn't alone. I was sitting in the dark, staring at the blank wall of my apartment, when I felt it. A presence, cold and suffocating, filling the room.
Who's there?
I whispered, my voice barely audible. The hum answered, deeper now, resonating through my chest. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the corner, its shape shifting and distorting like a mirage. It didn't speak, it didn't need to. Its gaze pierced through me, and in that moment, I understood. The Martians hadn't just discovered the truth about existence. They had become it entirely. Their consciousness, their despair, their understanding, it had transcended death, lingering in the void between worlds. And now, it was here. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the figure. Hours, days. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually it faded, leaving only the hum behind. But it didn't feel like a departure. It felt like a merging. The Martians were still here, not as beings, but as echoes, fragments of thought woven into the fabric of reality. And I was part of it now. I don't expect anyone to believe me, as even if they did, it wouldn't matter. The hum is spreading, carried through the images, the data, the very act of knowing. It's too late to stop it, too late to undo what we've done. All I can do is write this, a final confession, a futile attempt to warn those who might stumble upon the same path that I did. But if you've made it this far, it's already too late for you too. The hum is in you now. Can you hear it? It's faint, isn't it? A low, steady vibration at the edge of your consciousness. It will grow louder, and one day you'll understand that life was a mistake.